Happy Independence Day to all of our viewers. Yes, it is India at 75 that we are celebrating right here at ET Now. Today morning, Prime Minister Narendra Modi from the ramparts of Red Fort gave the usual speech on Independence Day, but more importantly, has also talked about Amrit Kal, India at 100. We've been talking about Rise with India, how this is India's decade, and today we're going to be talking about what independence, freedom means for all of us and what India should look like at India at 100. The message from the Prime Minister is very clear. India must become a developed nation by then. And that's exactly what I'm going to be discussing with this A-star panel that we're bringing to you today on 15th of August 2022. It's a panel in collaboration with industry body CII. Joining us live right here on ET Now, CII President Sanjiv Bajaj, the top boss of Bajaj Finserv. Also joining us is ITC Chairman and Managing Director Mr. Sanjiv Puri, the Vice President of the CII. And as always, we have on Independence Day, Mr. Chandrajit Banerjee, the Director General of CII. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us here today on ET Now. Happy Independence Day to all of you, to all of your teams, to all of your families. Thank you for taking time out on this holiday, for being live with us here on ET Now. Mr. Bajaj, I'm going to come to you first. Let me begin by first asking you, we've all heard the Prime Minister's speech. He's also laid out a five-point action plan, if you can call it that, for India at 100, the punch plan for India at 100, as India must become a developed nation. Can I begin my conversation with you first by asking you, what does independence mean to you, and how do you see India at 100?
So first, very happy Independence Day, Nayantara, to you, everyone at the channel, and to all your viewers as well. The significance of independence is many. It starts off by recognizing those that helped us with independence and that brought us to where we are today over the past 75 years. It's also about a celebration. It's a celebration of us as a nation. It's a celebration of us as people, of the immense fortune, the good fortune that we are in to be in a position of where we are today as a country and as people. But it's equally a responsibility as we plan out for the country's future, for our people's future. And as the Prime Minister said, over this Amrit Kal period, the next 25 years, what is that India going to be? What is that India that's going to provide education, that's going to provide healthcare, that's going to provide livelihood for all, and by doing so, provide us the necessary tailwinds for us to dream our aspirations, for us to grab our opportunities, and for us to contribute to each other, to our nation, and to the world.
Right, that was the five-action point, of course, laid out by the Prime Minister, where he's also said it's going to be imperative, to fight corruption, asking all 130 crore Indians to join him in the fight against corruption. Also went on to say that we need to fight dynastic politics as well as nepotism. Mr. Puri, I'm going to come to you now. If you'll permit me, I'll begin with on a lighter note with you. India at 75, this Independence Day will also mark independence for you and ITC when it comes to the social media trolls, the internet trolls that were just waiting for ITC to pick up. Now, outperforming the Nifty, the rest of the stock markets, becoming the darling of the stock markets, so as ITC marches towards India at 100, what is independence going to mean for you?
Well, I think certainly I endorse what Sanjiv has just said. That's the whole spirit. And if I look at it from our own perspective of ITC to specifically, address what you asked me, well, it is going to be a bigger resolve, a bigger dream to fulfill our credo of nation first, sab saath bade. It's about commitment to sustainable and inclusive growth. And that will manifest in our continued investment to develop manufacturing capacities of scale that will meet not only the requirements of India, but make a footprint at a global stage, take world-class Indian brands to the global stage in a big way, and also make a contribution to inclusive growth, particularly through transforming the agriculture sector through digital and technology, and making India a global player of significance as far as value-added agriculture is concerned. So this is the way I look at it and how we can contribute towards sustainable and inclusive growth. And whilst we do so, I think we also recognize that there is this facet of climate crisis, and decarbonization is an issue which we are all working towards. But at the same time, the world crossing 2 degrees because of emissions elsewhere in the world is a reality. So we also have to learn to live with it. So adaptation, particularly of the agri-value chains, becomes very important. So that's another area that we would like to work upon.
Chandrajit Banerjee, the Prime Minister has also said when he spoke talking about India becoming a developed nation in another 25 years, the call on the private sector to join the government. We've now been hearing about the Mahakumbh of Capex cycle, something Kumar Mangalam Birla has talked about. Finally, that turnaround story is here, where at least announcements are coming in from the private sector as far as Capex cycle turnarounds go. What is it that the CII, its various members, are planning?
So, of course, as we see, if you really look at the CII's latest surveys, we have very clearly been able to figure out that to your specific point of Capex cycle, we see the capacity utilization at a very strong, to be pretty strong now, and the discussion of expansion pretty much happening in certain sectors, and some sectors pretty much on the board. But importantly, what you asked also was about the role of private sector and the involvement of private sector. And I think over the last few years, we have seen tremendous recognition towards the private sector, the role the private sector is creating in terms of creating wealth for the nation, in creating livelihood. So I think that's the partnership which private sector was waiting for. It has seen it in the last few years, and I think there's a lot more therefore the private sector can contribute in terms of the growth and the development of the country. And when we talked about an India of a developed India in a few years' time, in the next 25 years, the role of the private sector would be very, very important in terms of areas, not only being world-class in our production, not only being in world-class in competitiveness, in terms of being able to be present in all parts of the globe through footprints, both in terms of investment and exports, but very, very importantly, participating in the development of India, being present in education, being present in healthcare, being present very strongly in skilling and employment and creating livelihood. So when we talk about a $40 trillion economy, say by 2047, the role of private sector would be extremely important in being competitive and also being able to engage with the various government policies. And therefore, the road ahead for us is a very strong partnership between different stakeholders, between the private sector, civil society, between the private sector, the government, state and center as we move ahead.
Oh, absolutely. And, with that, for all this to happen, we're of course going to need the banks to step up, financial services. That's going to be such an important component. And with that, Mr. Bajaj, I'll come to you. Today, the RBI Governor on the Twitter handle has said, as we celebrate 75 years of independence, this is a moment of reflection and renewed resolve to work for the betterment of our country. Happy Independence Day. That's the message from RBI Governor Shaktikanta Das. You understand banking, you understand financial services, and for everything that we're discussing is going to be so crucial. NPAs, historical low. We've been talking about how this is going to be the decade for banks now, for NBFCs as well. There was a tug of war that we were seeing with fintech, maybe a lot more that was being talked about. So as we learn from the recent past and as we march towards India at 100, Sanjiv Bajaj, how do you see financial services play a role responsibly?
I would look at this, across 4 different parameters. And the first is we need to create access And by this, I mean access at the bottom of the pyramid. We cannot be a developed country if the bottom 40% of our population is excluded from financial services. The digital world, responsible use of data for cross-selling will allow us this access to the bottom 40%. Otherwise, we will all only end up lending to insuring and managing investments of the top 60% with 700, 800 million people. Industry has enough to do. So I believe the first is to provide access. The second is then to build capacity. We need, as I've said enough times before, many more banks, many more NBFCs. Look at what insurance has done. Today, there are over 50 insurance companies from 20 years ago, and insurance has grown manifold. Even then, we don't have enough access, but it is a lot more than where we were 20 years ago. So we need to ensure that there is access of financial services products for all. Third is innovation. While you can build a Me Too strategy and size for a certain period of time, I believe that innovation will make all that difference as we try and build out national champions in financial services. And the fourth to me is aspiration. We have a large enough domestic market where companies across sectors can, in most sectors, can spend the next 10, 20, 30 years just focused on domestic markets, and nothing wrong with that. But if we can build on our collective capability, then let our aspirations fly. Let us create not only those national champions, but international champions in the key sectors where we can build capability and capacity. That's what we need to do in the coming years.
And Mr. Bajaj, when we see the RBI governor reflect and resolve to do better, they're going to have to play a very big role, right? Because as we're getting the cues from the US Fed, the US economy, which printed trillions of dollars, now going into quantitative tightening, back home in India, more than ever, you know, we will have to be very, very conscious of balancing growth as well as sucking out liquidity and fighting inflation.
Those are near-term challenges, Nayantara, and the RBI is a very capable and mature institution. It has handled not only the current crisis, but past crises as well, very effectively. And I have no doubt that over the next 18 to 24 months, we will look back and say that that was a job well done. When we are today looking at India at 100, we have to go well beyond our short-term challenges, not to belittle those at all, but we have to go much beyond that to see that how do we develop that next India? And that's a role that each one of us has to play. The regulators have to play that, the government has to play that, private sector has to play that. We have to take our society with us as we each grow. That is both an opportunity, but it is also a very clear responsibility on each one of us.
Mr. Puri, you know, you talked about how we like to see ITC at 100, and I thought it was so interesting, and this is what is discussed so often, and a lot was being said in 2020, 2021, which now doesn't seem to be held with the same, vestige as it was earlier, about ESG standards, decarbonization. It's as if the world is also understanding that while we need to go green and renewables is going to be so very important, fossil fuels will stay here. There will be companies that will be adding carbon credit, but they will have to also move to, decarbonize. ITC, of course, is an example of that.
Nayantara, what is really the question? I missed that.
I wanted to ask you, as we move towards India at 100, how will companies fight reducing carbon credits? And at the same time, as we all know, they will need to add to the carbon footprint as well for India to become a developed nation.
So, yeah, that's a very, very important area, because India's carbon emissions are much lower than the global averages or the leaders in the world. And India does need energy consumption to go up for its own developmental needs. At the same time, there is a target of decarbonization. India is committed to carbon neutrality by 2070. So that's the path. At some point of time, it's going to peak, and then we will start reducing. And this will need a lot of investments of technology. On one hand, it's going to be around renewables. On the other hand, it's also going to be on technologies that will emerge in the future on carbon, on storages, carbon capture. It will also be about absorbing technology related to green hydrogen that will come in over a period of time. So many of these facets will come in. But besides technology, I think what is important is to understand that India also needs to focus on nature-based solutions. And the Honorable Prime Minister also spoke about our strengths and our heritage. And one of our heritage is also on adoption of nature-based solutions. And they become important in two facets. One is that, water is a big crisis as far as India is concerned. 54% of India is water stressed. Predictions are that, 21 of the top 30 cities may be out of water, groundwater out by 2030. So on one hand, as the Honorable Prime Minister alluded to today, it's a responsibility of citizens to conserve and use as less as possible. On the second hand, in all the usages, whether it's agriculture, industrial, how do we produce more efficiently? How do we build capacity for rainwater harvesting? So managing both the demand and supply side of water, I think that's going to be very, very critical. And the third, and this is what will get also important from reducing the risk of climate change, bringing in resilience to our agri-value chains, is restoration of biodiversity. There is millions of hectares of degraded forest land in India, and India also has an ambitious target for afforestation. So I think afforestation, water, decarbonization, and last but not least of all, also learning to adapt to climate change, because that 2-degree, as is predicted, is going to happen. So that will see a lot of extreme weather events, and we need to adapt to that.
We already are when we see some of those freaky weather changes, don't we, Mr. Puri? But of course, this is, of course, the burning issue. And we're also seeing from the banking system, financial institutions, how they're leading a degree of credence to this and priority when it comes to either lending or equity investments. But Mr. Puri, before I move on to Mr. Banerjee, something I wanted to also ask you. The Prime Minister has called this India's decade, clearly playing with the word technology here. He's talking about 5G from the ramparts of Red Fort as well. So as India gets ready to roll out 5G, as we embrace tech and we really led from the front here, how can India leverage the decade according to you, and what will conglomerates also be doing on this front? Is it going to be conglomerate driven, or is it going to be driven by, the entrepreneurial spirit that has been unleashed as we're seeing in the startup universe?
So I think the answer will really be a mix of it. Corporates certainly need to invest a lot more on R&D, because technology is what is going to give us competitiveness in future, and scaling up of some of the innovations that the startup ecosystem brings up. That's another role that corporates will play, because without technology, we cannot be competitive in future. And it's technology from a digital sense, and technology from the conventional sense of R&D in developing new products, new processes, and so on and so forth. Both of these are going to be very, very critical and are going to be core to competitiveness. And India does have the capability. In fact, India has the capability to actually produce a lot more outcomes with lesser resources in a short period of time. And we've seen many examples of that in the past. So yes, I think this is going to be a very important area, and all enterprises for scale and for global aspirations will certainly have to deepen investments in this area.
Chandrajit Banerjee, we've talked about manufacturing. We've talked so much on ET Now as well about India's policies from China, China Plus to what we've seen with PLI schemes. Today, what the Prime Minister has also spoken about from the ramparts of Red Fort is about Viksit Bharat. He's talked about Nari Shakti, where he's talked about the attitude towards women and not treating them with servitude. But having said that, at CII, whether we talk to the two industrialists here or the rest of the CII members, the women's participation in the workforce. If we're going to be a developed nation, and we're going to talk about India at 100, that's going to need a lot more work done.
Yes, indeed, indeed, and I think you brought in a very important point, and I think therefore what we really need to do is very fundamental, and that is start education. And that's going to be a key factor: education, skill development, and women's participation into various types of work, which and when you go to a factory, I have been to a factory in very near to Jaipur, and I found even in the shop floor that there are more than 70% young women involved on the shop floor with machines in a manufacturing company. So it's possible. It's just possible. It's a mindset that needs a lot of change, and we need to give them opportunities. And they can be much there. What we have seen in some of these factories where I have personally been to, I have seen the type of dedication that one has seen in their type. They don't waste money in terms of drinks. They don't waste money. All the money that they earn go back to the family. So it's a very, very important area that we have to bring in our focus collectively in the next 25 years. And an institution like ours has a big role to play, especially when it comes to girl-child education, girl-child skill development, and giving them that self-confidence that this is an India where there is opportunity for them and they would be treated at par. So there are within, as you talked about, we have been really trying to bring in a lot of codes in terms of salary parity, in terms of even giving more opportunities to the girls, and policies which would be also enablers, important policy enablers, which would require private sector to be more incentivized to get the girls in, like there are working hours issues, etc., which they are all prepared to take, and the safety, etc., needs to be ensured, and that responsibility comes onto the industry really to put in. And I think that's what we would work on as an institution, to see more and more of the corporate sector get involved in giving opportunities, and more of our families, rural India, where we can really educate and give them opportunities for education and skill development.
There's no denying we need greater women participation from the shop floor to the corporate boardrooms. Sanjiv Bajaj, coming to you. There's a lot to celebrate, but like I said, as we pontificate and also talk about going forward, you touched upon two very critical areas: healthcare and education. We have barely scratched the surface. And look at the stark divide that you also already to see between urban and rural, something that COVID has also magnified. Going forward, this, would you say, is the biggest unfinished agenda, the unfinished business? And how can it become better, finished? Where do you see it all happening? There are already murmurs in the corridors of power, for example, that they'll allow FDI in education. There's going to be a lot of capital also that's going to be needed for healthcare. We're going to need many more medical institutes as well to have the doctors and nurses. There's a lot of unfinished business here.
Fully agree on that, Nayantara. This is part of our fundamental challenge, but also a significant need. How do we ensure that education and healthcare, starting even at the primary level, we institutionalize quality and capacity? So it's not only about putting the right equipment over there, but it's also ensuring that the quality of the service, the quality of the teaching, the training, that is something that is significantly increased, and at the same time that is horizontally institutionalized all across the country. We have the classrooms there, we have primary healthcare centers there, so the infrastructure is in place, and if there is some upgradation of that, that is easy to do. The big challenge for us is the quality of education that we are imparting onto young kids, or the quality of that primary healthcare when somebody in the remote part of India is unwell. And this is again a place where government and private sector can work together, provide access to upgrade equipment. It's also a place where, using the digital world and remote consultation we have seen through the pandemic, that worked quite effectively. So we have to institutionalize all these different initiatives and bring together a uniform, I would say, solution.
Mr. Puri, I'm going to give you the final comments here. As we march towards India at 100, we've already started to see a change in the foreign institutional investors when it comes to stock markets. As we start to see quantitative tightening around the world, it is being said that India will remain the brightest spot on the planet, because if you're not going to do business in India, where are you going to do business? And this is now a new India which wants to create domestic champions, international champions. Tell us, spearheading one of the largest conglomerates, one of the oldest conglomerates that we have in the country, how are you going to make sure that all of our dreams and every Indian's dream also comes true?
So I completely agree with what you said, Nayantara. In fact, it is India's time, India's tech decade, as the Honorable Prime Minister said it. I think a lot of the foundational blocks have been put in place through various interventions like Digital India, Make in India, the whole focus on Atmanirbhar, which is also about engaging very strongly globally, and the steps towards dealing with transforming the agriculture sector. I think all of this are really the building blocks for sustainable and inclusive growth. And I think with the manner in which per capita incomes have now progressed, in the near future, we will also reach the point of inflection, which will see a sharper correlation with the consumption. And that's the time we are going to see a much greater virtuous cycle come in. So all in all, I think the foundational blocks are in place. And I think the 5 principles that the Honorable Prime Minister articulated today really put the spirit behind adopting these principles and moving ahead with greater resolve and bigger dreams to fulfill the dreams of the aspirational society. So I'm completely very optimistic, and I'm pretty confident that this will be realized sooner than later.
And Chandrajit Banerjee, you'll have your task cut out, making sure that, all your colleagues at CII, of course, keep the focus, raise a sharp focus on the bottom line, but also don't forget to give back. Also don't forget to, have their largest, to fulfill the larger ambitions for the new India.
Absolutely so, and actually that's the journey that we have already embarked upon. And today, 15 years back, we talked about India at 75, and today at the CII and the industry, we are looking at. We have started an exercise of India at 100. We are dreaming big, and which will really look into all the aspects of what the components that you have just discussed on your show. And what we are really looking at is a morally, economically, technologically advanced. It's a meta India at 100. And that's for that, we would have to see to it that we can give the type of required training which is required to our private sector, as well as to get the private sector's expertise into with the various stakeholders in the society to make such a big ambition that we have set for ourselves for 25 years later achievable.
It is, of course, achievable. It has to be achievable, and all of us will play a big role in doing just that. I'd like to thank all of my panelists for joining us live today here on ET Now. Here's once again wishing all of you a very happy Independence Day.
Thank you.